How does something somebody said to you at 10 in the morning still have its hands on you at midnight? That's a real question, and I want you to sit inside it with me for a minute, because the answer is going to change how you walk through tomorrow. You know the moment I mean. Somebody leaned into the doorway of your cubicle, or caught you in the hallway between meetings, and said one sentence with a little hook buried in it. Must be nice. Or, no offense, but. Or the family version, the one that's been said to you since you were 9 years old, in that same tone, with that same half-smile at the end of it. 4 seconds of sound, maybe 6, and then you carried it. Through the rest of your shift, through the drive, into the kitchen while you stood there with the fridge open, not actually looking for anything. You wrote 3 different responses in your head, each one better than the last, none of which you'll ever say. At 11 at night, you were still turning it over, and you noticed with a kind of exhaustion that you were still turning it over, which somehow made it worse. So here's what's strange, and it's strange enough that once you see it, you can't unsee it. That comment took 4 seconds to happen. It took 14 hours to hurt you, which means something other than the comment was doing most of the work. That's the ground we're walking tonight. Not positive thinking, not pretending things don't sting. Something much more precise and much more useful. If you want to keep walking this way of looking at things, go ahead and subscribe and leave a like if that hallway moment landed a little too specifically. It's a quiet way of helping this reach the next person who's still up, replaying something small. Now, back to the 14 hours. Between the thing that happened and the pain you felt, there's a step. It's fast. So fast that most people live their entire lives without once catching it. But it's there, and it's the whole hinge of a human life. The step is this. Something happens. Then, before you can breathe, some part of you decides what it means. Not what it was, what it meant. About you. About them. About how your life is going and what kind of person you must be for this to be happening to you again. And that second thing, the meaning, the ruling, the sentence handed down in the dark somewhere behind your eyes, that's what you actually spent your afternoon carrying. Not the words. Your verdict on the words. Almost 2,000 years ago, a man who had every external thing a human being could want kept writing the same discovery to himself, over and over, in a private notebook he never meant for anyone to read. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, and those notes are what we now call meditations. He wasn't teaching anybody. He was reminding himself, night after night, of one thing he kept losing hold of. When something outside you distresses you, the pain isn't in the thing. It's in your estimate of it. And you have the power to revoke an estimate at any time. Let's take that out of the philosophy and put it in your hallway, because ideas like this die when they stay general. The raw event was this. A set of sounds came out of a coworker's mouth, and your ears received them. That's the whole event. Everything else was added. What got added was a case. He doesn't respect me. Everyone in that office heard it. This is what they think of me and always have. I let it slide again, which means I'm the person who lets things slide. And then the older, heavier one underneath, which is the one that actually ruined your evening. The sense that something about you invites this. None of that was in the 4 seconds. All of it was in you. Now, I need to be careful here, because there's a cheap version of this idea floating around, and I don't want you to walk away with it. This is not, he didn't mean it. This is not, you're being too sensitive. This is not choose to be happy, which is one of the emptiest things one American ever says to another. Maybe he did mean it. Maybe he's been undermining you for a year, and that's a real thing you'll need to handle on a real Tuesday. The claim is narrower than that, and honestly, it's more radical. It's that the handling and the suffering are 2 different jobs, and only one of them requires you to be in pain for 14 hours. The Stoics, the school Marcus came out of, a group of thinkers who spent about 400 years working on exactly this problem, had a word for the raw material that arrives before you've done anything with it. They called it an impression, the bare picture, the sounds, the tone, the face, before you've written a single line of story on top of it. And then they had a second word, and this is the one that matters. Assent. The moment you sign your name to the story. The moment the impression stops being a picture and becomes a fact about your life. Almost nobody notices their signing. That's the whole problem. The pen moves so fast that the signature feels like part of the event, like it came in the door with it. Think about how much of your life has been decided by signatures you never knew you gave. The relationship you left because of a meaning you assigned to a change in someone's voice. The opportunity you didn't take because of a story you wrote about why they'd say no. The whole decade you spent believing something about yourself that was never once demonstrated. It was just a verdict handed down early by somebody who wasn't qualified and never appealed. You've been living inside your rulings and calling it reality. That's not a failure of intelligence. It's the default setting for every human being who has ever lived. But defaults can be seen. And a thing you can see, you can eventually get some distance from. That distance is the only real estate you own that nobody can take. Picture what's actually running in there, because it helps to see it as a place. You've got a courthouse inside you, and it never adjourns. No holidays, no weekends. Cases get heard at 2 a.m. while you're supposedly asleep. But it's a strange courthouse. There's no cross-examination. No witnesses ever get called. The gavel comes down before anybody sits, and the sentence starts immediately, and you serve it. Sometimes for an afternoon, sometimes for 11 years, without once wondering who's up there in the robe. You know the American version of this feeling, at least the outer version. The envelope with the jury duty summons in it, the one you leave on the counter for a week because opening it makes it real. The hallway outside traffic court on a Wednesday morning, everybody sitting on those wooden benches with their paperwork, waiting to find out what the ruling is going to cost them. That's how most people relate to their own minds. Waiting on a bench to find out what the ruling is. Here's the turn, and it's the strangest thing about being a person. You were never the defendant in there. You're the judge. You always were. You've just never once looked up. That's what Marcus kept trying to get through to himself in those notes. He had legions, provinces, more authority than almost anyone in history, and it didn't matter. A rumor could ruin his week. A rude senator could take his whole evening. So he'd sit down at night and write the same reminder in a slightly different shape. Something like, take away the ruling that you've been harmed, and the harm goes with it. Not the event. The ruling. And it worked well enough that he wrote it again the next month, and the next year, because it kept slipping. That's the part I find comforting, actually. The most powerful man alive had to remind himself of this 100 times and still lost track of it. So the fact that you've lost track of it for 30 years isn't a personal defect. Now, a fair thing to push back with. If the gavel falls in 1/10 of a second, and I don't even hear it, what exactly am I supposed to do about it? Good. That's the right question, and the answer isn't willpower. The answer is that the gavel is fast, but it isn't first. There's always a hair of space before it. Not long. Not the dramatic pause people imagine when they talk about responding instead of reacting. An actual sliver, about the width of one breath. You've been in that sliver before, and you know it, because you've had moments where you saw yourself about to get furious and something in you went, quietly, look at that. That sliver is the whole territory. Everything Marcus ever wrote to himself was an attempt to widen it by a half-second. And a half-second is enough. You'll see. Let's test it somewhere with no villain in it at all. Interstate, 6:15 on a Thursday evening. Brake lights all the way to the horizon, that red glow sitting over the whole road. Something happened 3 miles up. You'll never know what. And now nobody's moving. Your hands are at 10 and 2, and you notice you're squeezing hard enough that your forearms ache. The vent is blowing air that smells like the car. Somebody 2 lanes over lays on the horn at nothing, at physics, at the concept of traffic, and it accomplishes exactly what horns accomplish. 35 minutes of your life. That's the event. But look at what's in the car with you. You're going to be late. And being late means the thing you said you'd do won't get done, which means the same thing it always means about you. Your evening's already gone. You can feel the specific flavor of it. The tightness across the shoulders, the jaw, the low simmering conviction that this always happens to you and never seems to happen to anyone else. Now look 4 cars ahead. Somebody in a Corolla has the window down, elbow out, listening to something. Same traffic, same 35 minutes, same accident 3 miles up. The traffic is not producing your suffering. The traffic is producing traffic. I want to say the honest part, because I'm not going to sell you serenity and gridlock. Being stuck is genuinely irritating. Your body has somewhere to be and it can't get there, and there's a real physical restlessness in that which no philosophy dissolves. But notice how small that raw irritation actually is compared to what you were carrying. The irritation is maybe 2 inches deep. Everything past that, the story about your life, the case you were building against your own reliability, was added by the judge, on the spot, without evidence. And you can pull the addition back. Not by fighting it, by naming it. That's the whole practice, and it's almost insultingly plain. In the car, out loud if nobody's with you, cars aren't moving. That's it. That's the event. The rest is my commentary. Something releases when you say it. Not everything. The shoulders come down maybe 40%, and 40% is an enormous amount to get back on a Thursday. There's one more thing about that traffic, though, and it's important. Sometimes the verdict is wildly out of proportion to the moment. You're not annoyed, you're near tears over brake lights, and you know while it's happening that this isn't about the road. When the ruling is that much bigger than the case, it's usually not about the case at all. It's coming from somewhere older in you, something you set down a long time ago and never looked at again. If you haven't sat with that one yet, there's a reflection here called "The Parts of You That You Hide Are Running Your Life," and it walks right into that room. It's worth going through after this one, because these two ideas hold hands. For tonight, we're staying with the gavel. The courthouse doesn't only rule on things that already happened. That's the part that costs people the most. 11 at night. Everyone else is asleep. You're lying on your side in the blue light, thumb moving, and you're refreshing the news. You already read it. You read it 2 hours ago. Nothing has changed except the ordering of the headlines and maybe one new development that's really just the same development described by a different outlet. And you keep pulling down to refresh, and the little wheel spins, and something in your chest tightens a notch every time it loads. Ask what you're actually doing there, because it isn't information gathering. You're not going to act on any of it tonight. You couldn't if you wanted to. What you're doing is issuing rulings on a future that hasn't shown up yet. Pre-verdicts. Guilty, in advance, on 100 cases that may never be filed. Marcus dealt with a version of this that would flatten most of us. A plague running through the empire for years. Wars on the northern border that wouldn't end. He had every reason to lie awake, pre-suffering everything that could go wrong, and he'd catch himself doing it, and he'd write himself back to the same narrow question. What is actually happening right now, in this present moment, that I cannot bear? Almost always, the answer was nothing. Try it tonight, when the thumb starts moving. Not as a technique, just as an honest question. What's happening in this room, right now? A body in a bed. A blanket. A light. Some noise from the street. That's the entire inventory of the present. Everything painful in you at that moment is living in a different tense. And I don't say that to shame you for worrying. Your worry is love with nowhere to put itself. That's all anticipatory dread ever is. Care, running ahead of the moment, trying to protect something. The instinct is beautiful. The scheduling is off. You can even thank it, quietly, and set it down. Not permanently. Just for the night, because the case can't be heard until the facts exist. Here's what people find when they start doing this, and it surprises them. They expected to feel less. What they actually feel is more, because the attention that was out in the future, prosecuting phantoms, comes back into the room. The sheets have a texture. The dog is breathing on the floor. There's a car passing outside with one speaker rattling, and it's almost pleasant. That's what all the talk about being present is pointing at when you strip the incense off of it. Not floating. Just the mind, not off in a courthouse somewhere, ruling on things that don't exist. You were never behind on your own life. Your attention was just out working an unpaid shift. Now, let me say something to the specific kind of person who's still watching at this point in a video like this. You feel things at a higher resolution than most people around you. You always have. You catch the flicker in someone's face before they've decided what to say. You know from the first 3 words of a text whether something's wrong. You've walked into a house and known there'd been a fight in it 20 minutes earlier, and you were right, and nobody told you anything. That's not nothing. That's a genuine faculty, and it's rarer than you think. But it comes with a specific cost that nobody warns you about. If you notice more, you have more material. And more material means the case against you builds faster and looks more convincing. The person who didn't catch the flicker goes home fine. You caught it, and now you've got evidence. Real evidence, accurately observed. And your courthouse takes it and runs 8 hours of proceedings on it. That's why sensitive people so often hand down the harshest sentences on themselves. It's not weakness of character. It's a better instrument feeding a court with no rules of evidence, which means the fix was never to notice less. God, no. Half the beauty in your life comes from that noticing. The reason a certain slant of October light can put a lump in your throat, the reason music does what it does to you, the reason people end up telling you the true thing at the end of the night instead of telling somebody else. The fix is to give the instrument a courtroom worth its data. And here's the good part, the part that should make your night a little lighter. The same sensitivity that makes the verdict heavy is exactly what makes the sliver visible. Blunt people can't find that half second before the gavel. They don't have the resolution for it. You do. You've been feeling your own inner weather at a detail level since you were a kid. You're not disadvantaged in this work. You're overqualified for it. If that reframe hits something, leave a like on this. It's how it gets in front of the next person who's been treating their own depth like a design flaw. Because there's a whole layer under this that we haven't touched yet, and it explains why the rulings feel so automatic, so certain, so much like the voice of reality itself. They didn't start with you. Most of your verdicts were written before you could read. Somebody in your house had a standard, and you absorbed it whole, without ever seeing it stated. Maybe it was, needing help means you're a burden. Maybe being upset means you're being dramatic. Maybe the one that runs a lot of American men, quietly, for their entire lives, that a man who isn't producing something has forfeited his right to take up space. Nobody sat you down and said that. It came through in 1,000 small rulings you watched get handed down to other people, and to you, at 7 years old, in a kitchen. And then you grew up, and the courthouse stayed open, and it's still running that same code. So when your boss doesn't respond to an email for 2 days, the ruling arrives instantly, and it feels like perception, not interpretation. It doesn't feel like an opinion. It feels like seeing. This is the thing I most want you to have tonight. Those inherited rulings can be read, out loud, in daylight. And once a ruling is stated in plain language, it loses about half its authority immediately, because most of them cannot survive being said clearly to an adult. Try it on the last one that got you. Say the actual law you're being judged under. If I'm not the one holding everything together, I'm not worth having around. Now hear it. Really hear it in those words. Would you apply that to your closest friend? Would you apply it to a 9-year-old? Would you sign it today as the standard you're going to be measured by for the rest of your life? You wouldn't. Nobody would. But you've been serving under it since before you could drive. Marcus did this constantly, and it's the reason those notebooks read the way they do. A little repetitive, a little blunt, a man arguing with himself in the dark. He'd take the thing eating at him, state it in the plainest possible terms, and then look at whether it held up. Someone spoke badly of him. Fine. Was he harmed? Was anything he actually values now smaller than it was this morning? No. Then the distress was self-issued, and self-issued means it can be withdrawn. That's not coldness. It's a kind of housekeeping. And there's a warmth underneath it that people miss when they read the Stoics as tough guys. He wasn't training himself to stop caring. He was clearing out the false suffering so there'd be room for the real work. Being useful, being decent, doing the job in front of him without being at the mercy of every mood in the building. You have a version of that job. The building's different. The math is the same. So what's actually left when you take away everything the world can rule on? Marcus had an image for it, and it's the one that gives this whole way of thinking its shape. He described the mind that isn't ruled by its own reactions as a fortress, a place on high ground that can't be taken from outside. Centuries later, a French scholar named Pierre Hadot wrote a book about him and put a name on that image that stuck: the inner citadel. A citadel is just the stronghold at the center of an old city. Everything else can be overrun. The fields, the outer walls, the markets. And the citadel still holds. Now, the way people usually misread this is as emotional armor. Feel nothing, want nothing, let nothing in. That's not it. And if that's what it meant, it wouldn't be worth your time, because armor is exhausting and it makes you a worse person to be around. The citadel isn't a wall against feeling. It's the one small piece of ground the world has no jurisdiction over. Everything outside it can be taken. Your job can be taken. You've maybe already gotten that email, the calendar invite with no subject line, the meeting at 4:30 that everyone knows about by 4. Your health has its own schedule and doesn't consult you. People leave. Markets do what they do. The plans you made in January can be gone by March and you don't get a vote. What's inside the citadel is small. It's this: what you make of what happens and what you do next. That's it. That's the whole holding. And it sounds like a consolation prize until the day something big enough hits you that you find out it's the only thing that was ever really yours. People discover this in hospital parking lots and lawyers' offices in the first week after a funeral, and they always describe it the same way. Everything went, and something didn't. You may have already had that week. If you have, you know what I'm talking about, and you know it isn't theory. If somebody in your life is in that week right now, send this to them. Not as a fix. There's no fixing a week like that. But sometimes it helps enormously to hear that the small ground still under your feet is real ground, from a voice that isn't asking anything of you. Because that ground is where the next part happens. I want to be straight with you about what this does not do, because a promise that oversells itself is worse than no promise. It does not make you stop hurting. Marcus buried children, several of them. That's not a story anybody invented to make a point. It's just what his life contained, alongside the plague and the wars and the long stretches away from home. He was not a man who had figured out how to not be touched by things. Anyone who reads those notes as the diary of a person in perfect control is reading a different book than the one that's there. What's actually there is a tired man reminding himself of a discipline he keeps failing at. So if you've been listening tonight and some part of you has been quietly saying, "That's fine for a comment in a hallway, but my thing is not a comment in a hallway," you're right, and you should hold on to that objection. Grief is not a verdict. Physical pain is not a verdict. What was done to you by somebody who should have protected you is not a verdict you handed down about yourself. Those are events, and they land, and they hurt, and no reframe touches the center of them. The distinction the Stoics were making is finer than nothing can hurt you, and much more livable. The wound comes from outside. The suffering gets assembled inside. Both are real. Only one of them is yours to work with. And the reason that matters is not that it lets you dismiss your pain. It's that it separates the part you're stuck with from the part you're not, so you stop spending your strength on the wrong one. The loss is the loss. The story that you should have seen it coming. That you're the kind of person these things happen to. That you're behind everyone your age now. That's the courthouse, working overtime on top of an injury that was already enough. Most people, when something hard happens, get hit twice. Once by the thing. Once by the case they build about themselves afterward. And the second one usually lasts years longer than the first. You can put down the second one without dishonoring the first. That's the whole offer. That's not being tough. It's being accurate. And accuracy, in the middle of something terrible, is a genuine mercy you can extend to yourself. Sit with that for a second. Because it's the most humane thing in this entire tradition, and it gets buried under all the statue-face nonsense people put on the Stoics. They weren't trying to feel less. They were trying to suffer only what was actually there. And now the whole shape comes into view, and I want to go slow here, because this is the part that reorganizes everything. You have never once experienced a raw event. Not a single one, in your entire life. Every moment you've ever lived arrived already narrated. The commentary track was running before you were old enough to know there was such a thing as a commentary track, and it has never stopped, not for 1 hour. And you have been mistaking it for the world. So when you say my life has been hard, or people always leave, or I've never been good at this, you're not reporting on your life. You're reading back the accumulated rulings of a court that's been in session since you were small, that never called a witness, and that has been quietly using standards you inherited from people who were themselves just repeating what got handed to them. That's not a small realization. That's the floor moving. But look at what it means. If every experience you've ever had came through that filter, then the filter is not a minor feature of your life. It's the largest single factor in it. Bigger than your circumstances, bigger than the traffic, the job, the comment in the hallway, the year you'd like to have back. And it's the one thing on that entire list that's in your hands. Now open the window with me for a second. 2,000 years ago, in a military camp on a cold river up on the northern edge of the empire, a man sat down at night with a lamp going and wrote a note to himself about not letting the day's insult own him. He was the most powerful person alive. He had armies. He had the treasury of the known world. And what he needed that night was exactly what you needed on your drive home last Thursday. Every human being who has ever lived has stood in that same half second before the gavel. The Roman in the tent. The woman in a farmhouse 300 years ago deciding what her husband's silence at dinner meant. Your grandmother. The guy in the Corolla 4 cars ahead of you with his elbow out the window. Not one of them got to control what happened to them. Every single one of them had that sliver. You have never been as alone in this as those late nights made it feel. You've been standing in the oldest room there is, the one every person walks into eventually, and most of them never even see the door. You're looking right at it. So here's how it actually goes on a normal week, because I'd rather give you something small and true than something grand you'll abandon by Friday. You will miss it. Constantly. The gavel will fall 100 times tomorrow, and you'll catch maybe 2 of them, and both of those will be about 20 minutes late, after you've already been short with somebody who didn't deserve it. That's not failure. That's what the beginning is. Catching it late still counts. 20 minutes after the fact, in the car, you go. Okay, what happened was that she didn't answer my text. What I added was that she's pulling away, and I did something wrong. And you separate them. And the second thing loses maybe a third of its weight, immediately, just from being labeled. Then one day you catch it at 10 minutes. Then at 1. Then, eventually. And this is the moment I'd want for you. You catch it live. It's a very specific sensation, and there's nothing else quite like it. Something happens. Your body starts to move toward the reaction. And in that hair of space, some part of you just stands up and watches, and there's this small silence where the ruling would normally be, and you realize with something close to astonishment that nothing has to happen next. You're standing there in your kitchen or your driveway, and you have a choice, and you can feel that you have a choice, physically, like an open hand instead of a fist. That's not a technique working. That's you meeting the part of yourself that was never at the mercy of anything. A few practical things, since you'll want somewhere to put your hands. Say the event in the flattest words available. Not he disrespected me, but he said 4 words in a doorway. Flat language shrinks a case fast, because most verdicts survive on adjectives. Breathe out longer than you breathe in, once. Not for mystical reasons. Your body reads a long exhale as a signal that the emergency's over, and a body that isn't in emergency mode gives you a wider sliver to work in. And ask the question Marcus kept asking in different forms. Is anything I actually care about smaller than it was an hour ago? Usually the honest answer is no. Sometimes it's yes. And then you've got a real problem to solve. And solving real problems is far less exhausting than prosecuting imaginary ones. That's the trade this whole thing offers. Less suffering, more accuracy, and the return of an enormous amount of energy you've been spending in a courtroom nobody was making you attend. Let me tell you what changes on the outside, because it's not what people expect. You'd think this would make you cooler, more detached, harder to reach. It does the opposite. You get warmer, and people notice within a month, and none of them can tell you why. The reason is simple. When you stop handing down instant verdicts about yourself, you stop handing them down about everybody else too. The two run on the same machinery. So your wife comes in and puts her keys on the counter a little too hard, and the old you had already ruled. She's annoyed with me, here we go, and had already started building the defense before she'd taken her coat off. The new you just sees keys on a counter and asks how her day was and finds out it had nothing to do with you at all. It was a woman at the pharmacy and a thing with her mother. You'd be amazed how many arguments in this country are two people responding to verdicts nobody actually issued. And it changes what you're like to be around in a way that's hard to name. When people talk about somebody having a steady energy or being grounded, this is a lot of what they're picking up on, honestly. Nothing's being transmitted. It's just that a person who isn't adding a second story to every event has no static coming off them, no bracing, no scanning, no low hum of a case being built. Everyone in the room feels it and relaxes a little, and not one of them could tell you what they felt. Alignment, if that word's going to mean anything worth keeping, means that. Your response to the day coming from your own center instead of from whatever mood the day happened to be in. And your sensitivity finally gets to do what it was built for. All that resolution, all that noticing, aimed at what's actually in front of you instead of at building a case. You start catching the good signal too. That your kid's quiet in a particular way tonight, that your friend said fine with a half-beat delay. You see people more accurately than you ever did because you're not seeing them through a ruling. That's the part nobody tells you about this path. It doesn't wall you off from the world. It's the first time you've seen the world without a story stapled to it. The wall was never around your heart. It was around your eyes. And once it comes down, ordinary days get strangely rich. The commute is just trees going by. The coffee is just good. Your life stops being a case you're losing and becomes a thing that's happening, which is what it was the entire time. So, tomorrow, something will happen. Somebody will say something, or not say something, or the road will stop moving, or the email will come in with the tone you hate, and you'll feel the familiar tightening start. That's the moment. Not later, not in some future version of you who has this handled. Right there, with your hands wherever they are. You don't have to do anything impressive. Just notice that two things happened, not one. The event and the ruling. And ask which one you're actually mad at. That's the whole practice. It fits in a half second and it takes about 30 years, and both of those are true. I'd like to hear about yours. Somewhere in the last 20-some minutes you thought of a specific thing. A sentence somebody said to you that you're still carrying, or a verdict about yourself you've been serving under since you were a kid and just now heard out loud for the first time. Tell me about that one in the comments. People read them late at night, usually while feeling like the only person in the world who does this. Yours might be the one that gets somebody off the bench. And if there's someone in your life who's been convicted by something small this week, pass this along to them. It's a decent thing to be handed at midnight. If you want to keep going, subscribe. There's more of this to walk through, and we'll take it one layer at a time. One more thing before I leave you in the quiet. Everything we did tonight assumed your reactions are proportionate to what's in front of you, and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes the ruling is enormous and the case is tiny, and that means something older is in the room. If you haven't sat with that yet, the reflection called "The Parts of You That You Hide Are Running Your Life" goes straight into that, and it's worth walking through when you're ready. For now, just this. The emperor with the whole world in his hands and you, in a kitchen at midnight, are standing in the same place, holding the same small thing. The last inch of ground that no event, no person, and no year has ever been able to reach. Everything that happens to you tomorrow will arrive at your door empty-handed and wait for you to say what it is.